Okay, to all of you who are returning, welcome back. To all those who are here for the first time, welcome. To all those who aren't here, who left, c'est la vie, it's okay. We're going to go into this text for the rest of the semester, probably the rest of this year, at the pace I usually go, which is considered. Not slow. I lost my place where we finished in mid-May, and so I sent out a couple emails today, and all the emails came back, well, we're really on chapter 3, but you really rushed through the last part of chapter 2. And so I thought, okay, I guess that's a message. I'll go back to chapter 2 here at the end, and we'll revisit these verses. And then, of course, when I looked at them, the first line of the place we're starting tonight is a frantic passage through life. And I thought a frantic passage through the text is about the same thing. So in the sense of being unfrantic, we'll go back a little and slow it down, look at this passage. And also there's another reason. These are probably the most quintessential passages of the entire text in many ways, and they're worth spending some time on. But before we go right to the text, I wanted to explain the format. The format is we do sitting meditation practice. It's one of the many practices or exercises you can do that's conducive to settling the mind, and with that settling of the mind, activating an innate ability for insight that comes through a calming or stillness. This is only one way to do it, sitting meditation. So usually at the beginning of the semester, I go over the basics of the sitting meditation practice. There's many ways to do the sitting meditation practice. I tried to find the elements, first of all, that are most basic and common to the traditions, but the one that I have most familiarity with and was trained in. And usually it involves going over what to do physically, what the physical posture of sitting meditation actually entails. It's very pragmatic and straightforward. And then the next is what to do with the breathing, because the breathing is part of the integration of the practice. And third, what to do with the mind or the thoughts or the feelings in part of this practice. So it's a threefold approach. I don't want to be redundant and go over for people who have already been through this, but I'm wondering how many people, two forms of this question, would like to go over it again, or how many people would like to go over it for the first time. So just a kind of rough show of hands, again or first time. Nobody wants to go over it, so we won't go into, oh, okay. See, that was a real straightforward, I thought it was straightforward, because I suppose I could get an answer if we text me, but this is the old-fashioned way, I ask a question, and you actually sort of respond verbally. It's real. I mean, I'm really talking. So how many people would like to go over meditation? Okay. I think there's enough that we can do it briefly. I'll start it next week, and I'll go over it in 3 consecutive times. So next week I'll deal with the physical aspects of the sitting posture, and then the following week the breathing, and the last week on the mind training or the mental part of that. Okay. So tonight, we're going to go into the text. Those of you who are new, this is a Tang Dynasty teacher. His name's Hui Neng, Great Master Hui Neng. He was an illiterate during this period who had a profound awakening experience on his own without the aid of a teacher initially, but not really knowing if that was valid and true, and that he could trust himself completely. He went and found a teacher, bowed to this teacher, and began a series of trainings and lessons under this teacher until he finally, you could say, perfected his understanding. And then he himself was sent out by this teacher to begin teaching others. And this is a story, embedded in the text is the story of his life, which we've pretty much, I think, gone over at this point. We've discussed that. Very interesting life. Those of you who haven't, should just go back and read from the beginning, chapter 1, and you'll get him telling the story of his causes and the conditions and circumstances that led him to where he was. His particular teaching is called the direct teaching. And by that it's meant this is the most, I would say, stripped of any metaphysical, even religious-based sectarian approach. He's trying to come right at the heart of the mind, right to the ground, what we call the mind ground, Xindi. And he's talking to the human condition, he's talking to the deepest aspects of human nature in the most direct language that's possible. And so this sense, it's very appealing, and it has a modern purchase that a lot of texts lose because they're either antiquated in terms of their references or their allusions, or they're in a mindset that's particular to a time or place. This one doesn't seem to be that much at all. It's really almost like totally present. And the more I read it, the more I find it speaking to me as I go about. I'll tell you a little bit later about how it was coming at me at JFK Airport this summer. But it's got a direct pointing to your own mind and your own heart for spiritual fulfillment or spiritual realization, if we can use that language. And so it's much more psychological and emotional than it is doctrinal, although there are principles in here by which he suggests that you could steer your own self-cultivation and test them for yourselves and not simply take them as a matter of faith or on his authority. And so although he offers these things, prefers them out, he doesn't at the same time insist that you believe in him, but rather that you believe in yourself. So his first basis is if you have to have some confidence and belief in yourself to even begin this. Without that, you're completely going without a rudder, because what will you steer by? Anything you turn to rely on other than using your own measuring devices of your own inherent capacities will at the best seem lopsided, untrustworthy, and you'll never know whether they're true or not unless you verify them through your own direct experience. So that's what he means by direct. So far, we've gone over a very key point. In fact, just to highlight this because it's such a key line, if we go back, I believe, to the beginning of this would be probably the first chapter then. Let's see if it's here, where it all began. Yes. So if you look at page 7 of your text, this is the beginning of his teaching. There's a bunch of people gathered. And here's the line I want to call your attention to. Really, the heart of it is right here in this middle of the page. He says, good and wise friends, Bodhi or enlightenment or awakening is just the purity of your own nature. Attend only to this and you will straightaway achieve Buddhahood or the full capacity of your awakened nature. That line is just, that's the direct teaching. And you'll notice he's saying in this line, first of all, your own nature, your own deepest inclinations, your inborn capacity is whole and complete, pure. Pure meaning not needing anything from the outside. It's unadulterated. You have everything within you. And then his next line is, and if you attend to this, attend to your own nature, not seek outside, you will straightaway achieve the full awakening that's the potential of this nature. So there's two messages. One, you have it whole and complete, it's not outside. Secondly, you attend to this, you pay attention to this, to you, to your own being, to your existential state of mind, and you will achieve it. So now we go to the chapter we're on here, and he keeps coming back to this theme again and again, possibly because two things arise in this. One, we don't believe that. We don't believe that we have it. We don't believe that we're whole and complete. We feel that we're lacking, insufficient. We don't have what it takes. And that gnawing insecurity keeps us from owning this full capacity and leads us then to seek outside to replace what we think is lacking or absent. So that's one way it works. Against its realization is that we doubt it. We doubt that we have this. And so he's trying to assure you, have faith in this. Not in me, not in the Buddha, not even in my words per se, but in this own capacity that you have. Because if you don't have this, you're not going to get it. You can't get it without belief in this. It seems like a paradox, but it's absolutely true. There's no way to get it unless it's coming through your own being, because that's the only way you have to measure anything. So you have to start there, you have to continue there, and basically you end there where you began. But it's a cultivation of your own essential nature and not outside. Then the next step is, we don't know how to cultivate that. We might believe it's there, but when we begin to sort of think, well, how do I tease this out? How do I entangle it? How do I make it clear and unobstructed? It's so overwhelming and so daunting that we just throw up our arms in frustration, because it seems to be a Sisyphean task. You know, everybody knows Sisyphean? He's not a sissy. Sisyphean was a Greek. Okay, what was Sisyphus is his name?
He rolled the rock up the hill.
Yeah, he was punished by the gods. All these Greek heroes are always being punished by the gods. But he was punished by the gods, and his punishment was to roll this rock up a hill. And just as he'd get to the top, his fatigue and the force of gravity would roll him back down again. And then he'd have to start up, and he never finished the task. So this is called the Sisyphean task. This is not what the Sixth Patriarch's offering to us here. He's saying it seems that way to us, because we just don't understand how to actually put this into practice. So throughout this, and then later, as we get in, he'll talk about the role of doubt, and that a doubt is not necessarily a bad thing, and in fact, it might be an essential thing. Wow, that's interesting. And then he goes into these encounters with his disciples, and through those encounters, what I call case studies. You know, you're familiar with case studies. You look at the actual details of what happened in a particular case, and then you can derive principles from studying. That's how some people study law. They look at the cases and then do that approach. These case studies are his encounter with many of his disciples, and these are really lively. That's why they're called lively encounters. But they're applying this teaching technique to the actual day-to-day, thought-to-thought, real experiences of disciples and what they're wrestling with. So in that, he's teaching method. Okay, so tonight, we'll start with this part because I think hidden here are probably two major things that he's pointing to that prevent us from fully realizing this innate potential, coming to grips with it, owning it, and actually enjoying it. And what this is really about is enjoying perfect liberation, what he calls the unattached, liberated mind that is free, unencumbered, clear, and able to respond and move through the myriad things without attachment, without mistakes, without regrets, and so forth. It's the full functioning of the human capacity. So we're starting here. I'm going to try to tease out, maybe there's obviously more, but there's two that will jump out tonight. We start on the top of page 34, second paragraph. These are his verses at the end of this teaching session. He says, a frantic passage through life will end in bitter regret. If you wish to discover the true way, right practice is the way. If you do not have a mind for the way, you're stumbling in the dark, blind to the way. Someone who truly walks the way is blind to the faults of the world. If you point out others' faults, your fault finding itself is a fault. Others' faults I do not fault. As for my own faults, I blame myself. Just get rid of the fault-finding attitude. Once cast aside, the afflictions vanish. When attraction and aversion no longer block the mind, stretch out both legs and lie down. If you hope to teach and transform others, you yourself must have the skillful means. Do not raise doubts in others, and their essential nature will manifest by itself. I can't believe I rushed through this all last time. I'm sorry, I really apologize. Maybe I was in a hurry to, get on vacation or something. Okay, so let's go back to the frantic passage. I want to come back to that because I think that's a separate thing. I think what he's saying here, there's two dynamics, very practical, immediate. They're not metaphysical, they're not even intellectual. They're not philosophical. He's saying there's two, almost you'd say, emotive behavioral modes that we can get into that will obstruct our own self-realization. One is this franticness. So we'll unpack that a little. But the other one, and it's like quite a bit devoted to this, is fault finding. It's like, what? Why? And this is a Tang Dynasty text. And it's just like, why does he pay attention to something as trivial as fault finding? And I've read this many times, and I'm starting to think it's not so trivial. It's actually a major impediment, and it's such a major impediment and so deeply ingrained in me, and perhaps all of us, that we don't even see it for what it is. And that is, this isn't about sort of recognizing someone's, how should I say, habits or character flaws, but it has to do with an attitude, and one of the ways of doing it is, it's called captiously. Didn't you know captious? You know that word, captious? C-A-P-T-I-O-U-S, captious. Captious. Well, captious means an ill-natured inclination to stress faults. It actually means it's calculated to cause in the person a kind of confusion or entrap and entangle them into negativity. Whoa. So what he's talking about fault finding here is not like what happened to me today when I went to the doctor. The doctor looked at my test and said, "Shame on you. You despicable human being. You're deficient in vitamin D." Whoa. You know, mea culpa, mea culpa. You know. No. He just said, "I look at your things and you seem to be lacking a little vitamin D." Well, that's not fault finding. That's prescriptive therapeutic, pointing out something. My response to him was, instead of tears of remorse and shame and regret, was, "What can I do?" And he said, "Well, just get some vitamin D and add to your diet. Done." That's not fault finding. Fault finding is ill-natured. In other words, the intention of the person doing it is not therapeutic, but it's actually a little bit malevolent or self-righteous or negative, in the sense that it isn't to have you awaken to, but it's to have you feel as if you've been shamed, you've been dissed, you've been reduced. And it's also it's used in argument to sort of entrap you in a negative mode. So here what fault finding is referring to is something that's more like censure. Do you ever know censure? Or condemning. And I like the word judgmentalism. Judgmentalism is this kind of, you are the judge, literally, sitting on your high seat, and you are passing judgment on common, mortal, flawed beings, other than yourself. And the presumption behind this is, and that's what he's getting at here, by looking at others' faults in this judgmental and censoring way and dismissing them, writing them off, you actually obstruct your own awakening because you don't see your own faults, which is really what the whole focus has to be on. Because if you're whole and complete, then the entanglement that's keeping you from that is some fault or character flaw that you haven't figured out. And the reason we haven't figured out is because they work for us in some ways. They're actually psychologically effective in that they keep certain truths and mask certain things from us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing them if they didn't work. So this kind of fault finding can be a defense mechanism from facing your own. It seems so simple, but it could be. And instead of recognizing my own faults, I just simply shoot all my energy out at finding the faults of others. And by doing that, I feel as if I'm pretty faultless. So in this way, it's a kind of mask for arrogance. And so that's an overestimation. Or it can be a mask for insecurity. You really don't feel as if you're better than others. But you push this up because you don't want to face your insecurity, so it comes from underestimation. But either way, it's not your true self, it's not your true nature, and so you have to get past both of these. Whether the motivation is hubris and arrogance or insufficiency, both will block true understanding. So he's hinting at something psychological here of getting past or letting this go. That's why he says, if you point to others' faults, in other words, in this judgmental, censoring way, your fault finding itself is a fault because it's not healthy, it's not compassionate, It's actually discriminatory and rejecting. And he says for himself, he says, meaning not just him, he says a cultivator doesn't find fault with others. I only pay attention to my own faults. Moreover, this fault finding can be a third level, which is you're blaming others for your own, lack of purpose or life or way things are going. And so that the fault for whatever is coming is usually outside, not your own. And the benefit, of course, of what's coming, we always claim for ourselves. So there's a double. We don't credit others for the benefit. We only blame them for what's lacking. Either way, he's saying this will lead you down a road that tangles you. Just get rid of the fault-finding attitude, and once cast aside, the afflictions, this is the word for klesha, will vanish. When attraction and aversion no longer block the mind, stretch out both legs and lie down. What he's talking about here is this two forms of grasping and attaching. One is this craving, wanting, coveting. That's the one. And the aversion is the rejecting, pushing away. And both indicate a mind that is not settled in self, but is constantly seeking outside to either get or to distance and so forth. Sticking out both legs and lie down. This is a metaphor, okay? It's not to me like lazy. That's not what it's like. Oh, I just let it lay back. It's more describing in these texts a state of liberation. There's no more seeking. There's no more grasping. You're at ease. And so this is the language that's used to stretch out both legs and lie down. It doesn't mean you just stop practicing or cultivating. It means you have this very free and easy attitude now. Clear on that one? I don't know why they use that, stretch out both legs and lie down. I guess it's like the hammock. You're in the hammock, but you're in the hammock whether you're walking, standing, sitting, or lying down. You're just in a hammock going through life. So that's the first part here. Sometimes I had a colleague who took a vow of silence just to sort of try to get clarity about where he was obstructed, just what we call mouth karma. So there's three karmas. There's karma body, the actions that you do with your body, physical. There's the karma that you do with your mouth and your words, and then there's mental karma, which is what's going on internally, what you do. And all three generate seeds that bring back results. Some people mistake karma, they think it's what you do, and maybe what you say. But actually, what you're thinking, what you're intending, what you're, how should I say it, saturating yourself with habits of thought is actually generating karma. It's actually generating vibrations that cause results. So all three. So when you're cultivating, you're trying to, at one level, sort of clean up physically what you're doing in terms of harming yourself or harming others. And then the mouth karma has to do more with, generating a sense that your words are very powerful and they affect people for good or bad, and that you want to take responsibility for what you're doing with your words. So one way to do that is to take a practice of silence for periods of time, and before you say it, you can catch it before it goes out. It's really fast. Things go out so fast through the mouth. And you can grab to get them back, but they're gone. They're really gone. And so sometimes the silence helps you. It goes from the mind, through the bloodstream, through the neurotransmitters, through the brain, and it's coming out the mouth, and then because you're not talking, it just goes, and you can hear what you were going to say. And it's actually highlighted because it doesn't go out, and it's often quite embarrassing what comes up. And so he did this because he wanted to see. The thing he noticed was he thought he was just doing a lot of frivolous talk. My teacher used to call it, constantly talking about how 3 frogs have 6 eyes, things like this. It has no meaning. You just blah, 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 blather. But he realized what was coming out was fault-finding. It was really a kind of a revelation to him that he was saying something like 80 to 90% of what he was doing during the day was fault-finding. Now, not just saying it, but the interesting thing he says, and I never said it to the person I found fault with, I was always saying it to somebody else about them. So it's a kind of gossipy backbiting thing that's going on. So you're fault finding. You could say, I'm a bodhisattva, I'm finding faults like the doctor to help you heal. But if you don't share that with a person that's actually, and you just, what's your purpose of sharing it with everybody else? It's to make them look bad, make you look good, build up a little clique against somebody else, but it's never really therapeutically shared, even if it was true with the person. So he said, all my fault finding was gossipy. And like, wow. So he saw immediately how much of his activity was caught up in that. And he said, even if I didn't do it, I'm constantly thinking that. I'm constantly looking at the world through a lens of finding fault. And it was a very interesting revelation. I don't know if any of you ever practiced this vow of silence, but it's something worth considering. It's just getting a meter or getting a baseline about what the content of your discourse is, both coming out and internally before it comes out. Because I know, you can watch a group of people listening and whatnot, and there's lots of conversations going on behind those faces. And sometimes even behind the actual explicit language. Oh, it's so nice to see you. Really? And then behind that is something else. So catching that in yourself is really, can be a very profound moment of awakening. That's what he found with this practice of silence. Same reason why you might hold some of the precepts against killing or something like that, because you can catch your body from doing things you habitually do and then watch the reaction as you don't do and as you do other things. And observing this cause and effect with your body, your mouth, and your thoughts on yourself internally, on everybody around you, including the natural environment, is really what's called self-cultivation. And it's really just observation. So what he's talking about here is, if you're going to discover the trueness of your own nature, you have to listen to yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to get into the depths of your own being. As, who is it? Is it Yeats? The listening to the deep heart's core. There's this poem he says, I'm going to Innisfree. And why I'm going there is to be able to listen to the deep heart's core, to listen to oneself and know oneself deeply. That is the ground that's called the mind ground. But to do that, you have to listen, you have to be aware, and you have to pull away from what distracts from that project. And in fact, the Sixth Patriarch says that's the meaning of being human, is to engage in this process and rediscover your true mind, your true heart. And once you do that, then you can go out to the next line, and then you can maybe be some help teaching others. But the heart and core of the human experience is to find, to rediscover, to activate that, and to be in the fullness of that, which means you have to listen to yourself, you have to observe yourself, for better, for worse, and take stock of what's there, and that's what's meant by mindfulness. Okay? So he's saying what will distract you from that is constantly looking at everybody else's faults. That distraction of that will pull you away from listening to yourself, observing yourself. Now, the other thing he's talking about here is the first part, which is this frantic passage through life. And so, on one hand, one can get all messed up by not listening, not paying attention, because we're constantly shooting it out at everybody else. But the other part is, and this is more internal, and you have to think, well, this is Tang Dynasty. I had the image that people in the Tang Dynasty were really laid back, not like modern today. I don't think so. Obviously, he wouldn't be saying this. So, frantic means it's a fast, but it's fast and nervous. It's not just fast, it's nervously fast. I don't think frantic means that you are busy. You can be very busy, but you wouldn't be frantic. Okay, so be careful now. And he's like, oh, I'm just going to sit under a tree and not be frantic. You could actually end up being really frantic doing that. And you could end up doing a lot of things and not being frantic. So it's not about what you do, it's the attitude with which you do it that makes it frantic, right? I know some frantic meditators. Whoa, they're going high RPM as they're, it's just what's going on inside is frantic. I want to get enlightened, Am I getting enlightened? Is she getting enlightened before me? He's going faster, he's sitting long. And they're meditating, but they're frantic. So, huh?
It's like feeling rushed.
Well, feeling rushed. It's a nervousness. It's emotionally out of control. What frantic means, it's sort of like, it's anxiety driven. Okay? So the simplest of tasks can be anxiety driven and frantic. I mean, so if you think there's the zen of this and the zen of that, and it's some kind of simplistic cutting of flour or making bread or something like that, that's not what it's about, right? You could be working in a triage situation, emergency room, and not be frantic. On the other hand, you could be in a garden cutting one flower and be completely hyped over and stimulated and anxiety driven. So it doesn't refer to an external activity, it's talking about a state of mind. This is really important to understand, because otherwise we get into this thing of, oh, somebody's, because they're busy and engaged and have a family or something, they're frantic, whereas I'm not because I sit on my cushion all day. Nothing to do with that. And by the way, that's kind of fault finding. Gee, really? How did that creep in? Whoa! Yeah, fault finding means others are drunk, I alone am sober. Others are polluted, I am alone pure. So this is fault finding. But then you judgmentalize it into, and I live the holy, serene, unfrantic life, whereas you are wasting your time, blah, blah, blah. So frantic has to do, I would say it's anxiety driven, but it's, from the Buddha sense, it's dukkha driven. Now, dukkha driven means driven by restlessness, dissatisfaction, anxiety, stress. Not seeing things correctly and getting spooked. So frantic has to do with the way in which you perceive and the way in which you react to that, and then the loop you get caught up in, which is anxiety driven. Okay? So what he's talking about here has many dimensions to it, but it has to do with the primary driving mechanism of your life. Is it anxiety driven, or is it driven by a calm purposefulness, a meaning, like a river just flowing steadily, carving, moving, as opposed to the spurts of activity. So what I'm trying to point out here is that what he would be saying is it's not in any particular lifestyle that this would be the case, that you could be frantic or not frantic. Okay? And be very clear about this. So you could be in the world, really engaged, and be in the true way. And you could be in a temple or a religious institution, sitting quietly all by yourself in a cell, and be frantic and not be in the true way. So this is really important to understand, because he's always talking about the mind ground. He's not talking about some external manifestation. So this franticness then becomes, the better word for it, I think, is you're constantly distracted. Constantly distracted. And distracted almost in everything. So everything that you're doing is done not completely focused, but distracted by other thoughts, feelings while you're doing it. And this then becomes a pattern, a habituation pattern, that's very hard to break out of. And so I think that's what he's talking about. He's asking, saying, well, why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you get up in the morning and do what you do and go out and do that and come home and do this, day after day, week after week? What is driving that? Is it purposefully driven? Is it driven on the sense I'm sort of cultivating myself, I'm entangling, I'm getting into the fullness of my being? Or is it driven by a frantic anxiety? And if it's driven by frantic anxiety, he's saying, even though that's very strong, it'll end in bitter regret. There's no way that this can be fulfilling because it's at its root, it's off. So I was just, sometimes it takes me time to get into how much that energy can overtake. And the energy only overtakes because, in a sense, we forget that the wholeness is here already within. And so just making that little step of thinking I don't have it opens a door to inviting in a kind of frantic energy that quickly leads to a stampede. So I was thinking this summer I was in, I usually take off to spend about 3 or 4 weeks in Maine, northwestern Maine. Some of you know this. I won't show you the pictures this year, because last year it led bitter regret. How come you get to go there? So this year was even better because there was even less people. And now, don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't like people, but I have people all the time, so much that having no people for some time is really good. And so all I had there, the only companion I had was Penny, who is a Chesapeake Bay retriever, who's just out of the puppy phase, and a complete good friend. And so Penny and I spent the summer up in Maine, meditating, kayaking, just getting lost in nature. And I had about 3 weeks of that. It's in the west-northwestern pristine mountain wilderness of Maine. So I actually can drink out of the lake as I'm kayaking. I just scoop down the water and drink it. And I can go for hours. Not only will I not see or hear another human being, I see and hear nothing and nobody except eagles, egrets, blue herons. The most shocking was the moose. Because as I was in my serene samadhis, kayaking, say between me and where she's sitting in the chair, I was just like, la la, and then this moose surfaced out of the water. Because they go underwater and they feed for a long period of time. They don't do fast food, they do really slow food. So they're down there holding their breath, and then I entered this space, and this moose surfaced, and dripping with whatever they're eating, and looking at me in shock, and I'm looking at him in shock, and the dog's going, like in shock. And nobody knows what to do, and I think I want to get a picture of this. I've got my camera going. And so, because I didn't act aggressively or anything, the moose just kind of looked, I looked, and then turned and ambled away. Now, we're talking about something that's 7 feet tall and about 900 pounds. So, moose was in control. So, but that in itself was really kind of cool, just to have that as your major encounter. And so, I got really quiet as a result of that. And by the end of the 3rd week, when it was time to go back, the first place I hit was JFK Airport in New York. And so entering that space, wow, I could just feel the contrast between, and I'm not trying to praise myself, I'm saying that lake and that dog allowed me to be less frantic. It got me to a place where I could actually chill a bit enough to have a juxtaposition or contrast to feel, because I came through JFK on the way and I didn't notice very much. And it was only after 3 weeks when I went back to JFK and I thought, JFK hasn't changed. My consciousness has changed. I reclaimed my consciousness from all these distractions. And so it hit me like a ton of bricks. The amount of distraction that was built into that experience there was just overwhelming. And I caught myself kind of being pulled into it, pulling back to remember the lake, being pulled out again, because the allures for the distraction are very, very strong. But I thought about this passage because what was in the air was a franticness that was palpable at every level, in the food service, in what people were doing, at the pace at which it was going. And I just started to sit back and observe and try to get a handle on what was going on. And it's actually institutionalized. It's actually now systemic. The franticness is, in fact, like an IV going through the heart of our culture. It's not just 1 or 2 individuals. Everybody, and therefore nobody notices. And so I started the summer by reading Fahrenheit 451. I don't know, any of you have read Fahrenheit 451? Yeah, the title, Fahrenheit 451, it means it's a temperature at which books burn. So, so Fahrenheit 451 is the temperature at which books burn. And the fire department in this novel, by the way, 1950, whoa, talk about prophetic. 1950, this book comes out. The fire department doesn't go out putting out fires, it goes and starts fires. And it burns up piles of books. Libraries, book stashes, your book collection. All of these are to be eliminated from society because they distract people from being calm and oblivious. They make people think, to examine is to question is to discover, and there's a lot of stuff there that is disturbing. So to have a calm society, the fire department goes out and burns all the books so people won't have, and they remove front porches from homes so that people won't gather and have conversation. And what do they replace this with? 1950, right? So in 1950, they replace it with, he calls this big screen. And you get the big screen on the wall, and you sit and you watch it, and you watch game shows and soap operas. all day long. And the goal then, your aspiration is to have 2 screens on the wall. And finally, his wife keeps nagging him to make more money so he can have 4 screens. I'm talking about big TV, right? And those 4 screens are completely saturating the individual with this sort of oblivious games and soap operas, and it's interactive. And this is 1950 again, so that you can be part of the soap opera. You can type something in, and they'll say to you, "Oh, Mary, you look lovely today. You're Mary." And then you respond somewhere, and so people feel like they have a real life with these 4 screen wall TVs. And in the meantime, when they're not doing that, they're wearing what he calls seashells. Now, what are seashells? These are these little seashells attached to cords that you put in your ears. And then you listen to this 24/7 as well, whether it's pablum music or ads or the soap operas. I'm saying seashells, buds. So here I'm at JFK, and everybody's got these things in, and nobody's talking, nobody's conversing. I was on the plane, I was thinking, I can remember flying when there was all this noise on the plane, people talking about, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a vegetarian, I eat meat, I'm a hunter, nothing. The plane's come. Why? Because nobody's talking. And nobody's talking not because they got the buds on. And it's like, wow. So the level of distraction was built in. It was so high that nobody was not only not listening to anybody else, but not even listening to themselves. And what they were picking up on in the airport was, get more of this. We need to get more of this. You're going to miss out on some of these things that can distract you even further. And so it was like, and then I was listening to these kids talking about competing to get into an Ivy League school. They were talking about, I need to get in because I need to get a good job. Get a good job, you got to get a good education. I got to get a good job, and I got to go to science and technology. And then it's like, and what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to make all these things that people don't need, but they think they need, or they need to want, or they need, whatever. And that'll keep them frantic, so they'll buy more. And I have to do this faster and faster because I could lose my job. Google doesn't keep you, blah, 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 blah. Frantic. And where's this all going? Because I'm getting a job to convince people to want things they don't need, or to need things they don't want, or something like that. But it doesn't matter as long as I keep doing this. And these products were coming out, and the whole thing was going on, and I went, whoa! And at the same time, it's like, wow, and I'm thinking, Fahrenheit 451, this is really interesting. And I'm thinking, frantic passage through life, ends in bitter regret. So at that time, I'm reading now, I've gone through my reading list. I won't tell you what my reading list is. It has nothing to do with Buddhism for the whole summer. So I read Tolstoy, I read Wallace Stegner, I read Fahrenheit 451, I read Hallucinations by Oliver Sacks, right? And the last thing I was reading was T.S. Eliot. So I'm sitting at the airport. Now I'm not making this up. I'm sitting at the airport, and I'm looking at this, and I'm reading my T.S. Eliot, and these are the lines I'm reading from T.S. Eliot. I want to quote them for you. So he says, and this is 1952, around the same time that this is coming. He says, the state of people now in the world is neither plenitude nor vacancy, only a flicker over the time-ridden faces, distracted from distraction by distraction, filled with fancies and empty of meaning, tumid apathy and no concentration, men and bits of paper whirled by the cold wind. And I'm going, whoa. I see at the airport, I'm thinking, neither plenitude nor vacancy. People are neither empty nor full. They just have this constant, frantic anxiety. Only a flicker over time-ridden faces. A flicker of what? A flicker of possible the humanity or the depth of the soul. It just flickers past. It's just a flicker. Distracted from distraction by distraction. That's the line. So the heart of what the Sixth Patriarchs say, we're distracted. We are in the state of distraction. We are not in touch with our being. We're out of touch. And why are we out of touch? Well, we're never going to get to that because we're distracted from that by distractions. And so the emphasis to try to figure out what's going on, listen to myself, figure it out, you can't because the level of distraction, pile and distraction is so intense that you can't pause to stop to consider or think. And not only that, but it's encouraged. You're not encouraged to stop and pause and think. It was amazing. These people got off the plane. I share this with you because it's just like mind-numbing. These people got off the plane, a mother, her son, and the daughter. And they were kind of having a little conversation. They stopped at the store at the airport, and they all got these, whatever, devices, pads. Smartphones. There's an oxymoron, but a smartphone. They got a smartphone, and the next time I see them, they're standing in line behind me, and they are taking pictures of each other and sending them to each other on their smartphone and texting to each other as they're standing there. And they're not, I'm talking, just three of them together. It's like, oh, there she is. She's there, takes a picture, looks at, she gets a picture of him, looks at that, and then texts back, how are you? I'm good. You know, they're all standing there together, texting and shooting each other, and standing in line. And I thought, whoa, this is really interesting. Distracted from distraction by distraction. So then I'll finish this up because it's just, I get on the plane, and I have a nice seat, and I'm going to continue to read Eliot, I think. And this young couple comes up and says, would you mind changing your seat because you have an empty seat next to you? And then my wife and I, we're just married, my wife and I can sit here together for the trip. And I thought, well, how romantic. You know, what am I going to do? No, you know, I want my space. So I say, sure, that'd be wonderful. And so they proceed to sit down. I take another seat where they had one, and I watch them. And as soon as the plane takes off, now we got about a 6-hour flight, they both take out their devices, their pads. And he's playing some kind of card game. He's always moving the cards around. It's an endless card game. Maybe it's like solitaire? Appropriate. Solitaire. And she's playing some game where she's knocking things off of, you know, boop, boop, bang, bang, boop, boop, and the score goes up for 6 hours. And I'm thinking, let's see now. So when the plane ends, and I get up and I turn to them and smile, and I'm trying my little affected irony, I say, it's just so wonderful to see a young married couple wanting to share their feelings and thoughts intimately for 6 hours. And they go, huh? And that was it. They didn't quite get what I mean, straight or not. And you know, it was sort of like, wow, so that's how the whole thing is going. This distraction from distraction by distraction and so forth. So as I sort of absorbed this, I kind of thought about, although this is a Tang Dynasty text, I think the psychological impulse to escape from one's own being is built in, probably more so now because it's actually not only culturally sanctioned, but you're actually good for the economy if you do this. In other words, if you stay engaged in this way, not only will nobody ever question you, you won't have some Socrates saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. You'll have people saying you're actually interfering with productivity and growth by pulling away. Now, however, there's a new industry starting that'll make money out of distraction, which is these new retreat centers that you can go to, and you can have a week of withdrawal from these devices, but you pay for that, and then you pay to have the devices put in a safe during your duration there. And so I suppose this would be the new market, but I don't know unless you're really replacing some core access to something else. All this turns out to be as a sort of a bitter withdrawal and not really a liberating experience. And so the addiction rate, I'm just looking at what they call the recidivism after these retreats, is in the high 90%. And whether it's a 6-year-old or a 60-year-old, all people experience is a withdrawal symptom, a heightened anxiety, which is only satiated by going back to the device again. And so in terms of what we usually consider addiction, which are drugs, alcohol, and so forth, I think it's probably worth looking at these things, which are probably more insidious than drugs and alcohol. They're not illegal, but in terms of spiritual psychological growth, probably even more damaging. Probably even more damaging, because what's being marketed here isn't the product, it's consciousness control. Your consciousness has now been owned. So market share has to do with owning consciousness. If I can get your consciousness, whatever, and hold it, I've got you. And it doesn't matter what product I substitute in there. You will feel better, look better, be da-da-da-da with this, and this. And of course, everything you want when you finally get it, of course, is empty. And that emptiness then produces the anxiety and so forth. That's what he's meaning by a frantic passage. We have to kind of translate this in the contemporary, and I think he's just talking about a Tang Dynasty person who's in a hurry. This is talking about something really deep. Okay, enough on this. We'll continue next week. The next week's section really has to do with then, you better get a handle on this if you want to teach. If you think you want to teach and transform others, you really have to get a handle on this. And then he ends with a very, some people consider contradictory expression. He's saying, you're not going to find this liberation and enlightenment apart from the world. It's right within the world, right within your own existential experience that this is found, not by transcending it, which is a very interesting, but completely makes sense. So we'll go into that next week, and then we're going into the chapter 3 on doubts and questions. Okay, so welcome back. If nothing else, on a Friday night, you narrow your distractions down to the text and me. So any announcements? We'll save questions and doubts for next week. A little louder.
Can you hear me? No? It's only
Use a
online?
big voice for here.
Okay. Tomorrow we have a special guest from China. It will be visit us and give lecture here from 2 to 4, Dharma Master Da-an from Dinling-si Monastery. And in this week, all classes were started again, except the Monday class by Amelia Barini. This yoga and qigong will start on 13th September. And tomorrow we have the Avatamsaka lecture in the evening and all the programs like usual. And please welcome. Come.
So let me explain. At the ending, we do a ritual chant with bowing. And I just want to explain a little bit what's about. The actual chant that we're going to do is an intentionality aspect of Buddhism that has to do with intending whatever goodness, merit that came out of this text and this experience tonight, move it out of one's own sphere to universally share it in some way, to intend it to go out and have a radiating effect of goodness in the world. So it's called transference of merit. What you're doing is trying to generate the thought or feeling of sharing, of giving. That's the first part. The bowing then is the bow, in a sense, what you're bowing to is to show a kind of sincerity of expressing that wish by the act of bowing. The 3 bows at the end, which is usually called bowing to the triple jewel, we'll get into that later in this text. But what he's talking about here is not talking about bowing to icons and images and statues or other powers, but you're bowing to the triple jewel of your own essential nature, which he defines as Buddha of your essential nature, is your own awakened capacity that you're bowing to, acknowledging that it's there and that you want to, in a sense, pay respect to it and activate it. When you bow to the Dharma, you're bowing to the truth discerning ability of your nature. And when you bow to the Sangha, you're bowing to that purity or that wholeness of your essential nature. So although it seems like an external act, done according to his teachings, this is an internal meditative exercise where you're reactivating your own potential for awakening, for truth, and for wholeness. So see it in that way as you do that. Of course, everybody is free to do what they want, but I was trying to explain it in a way you can understand that this is not just ritual devotion to icons or images, but rather a mind ground cultivation that can be done. So we'll do it in English. I don't know the latest version. These versions keep changing. I know the English version that's being handed out, I think. So if somebody next week wants to lead the new version in English, you're welcome to, but tonight we'll do the old English. This is not Shakespearean English, it's accessible. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of Ling Li San Da